The city of Lagos sparkled under the morning sun, its bustling streets filled with the hum of life. Amidst the chaos of cars honking and street vendors calling out their wares, the luxurious brownstone house on Orchid Avenue stood like a palace. Behind its tall iron gates and manicured lawns lived the Williams family, Nina, her mother, and her father. At 16, Nina was the apple of her parents' eye. She had everything a girl her age could dream of: the latest gadgets, closets full of designer clothes, and a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a movie. Despite all this, Nina rarely smiled. Her heart carried a weight her parents didn't fully understand. Today was a special day. It was moving day, and the family's new home was filled with excitement. Mrs. Williams darted around, giving instructions to the movers, while Mr. Williams sat in the study, already buried in work calls. "Nina, come see your room," Mrs. Williams called from upstairs. Nina climbed the winding staircase, her steps slow and deliberate. She was greeted by the sight of her new room, a dream come true for most girls. It was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a chandelier sparkling above, and sleek, modern furniture arranged perfectly. A large holographic screen adorned one wall, ready to project movies, games, or whatever Nina fancied. "It's beautiful, Mom," Nina said softly, offering a small smile. Her mother beamed. "I knew you'd love it. And just wait, your father has a surprise for you in the backyard." Curious, Nina followed her mother outside, where a sleek, shiny drone hovered in mid-air. It had a smooth, silver finish and looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. "It's yours," her father said, appearing beside her with a proud grin. Fully voice-activated and capable of carrying small loads. Perfect for school projects or just exploring the neighborhood. "Thank you, Dad." For a brief moment, Nina's face lit up with genuine joy. As the sun began to set, the Williams family gathered for dinner in their grand dining room. Laughter and conversation filled the air, a rare moment of togetherness in their otherwise busy lives. But even as her parents chatted about their plans for the week, Nina's mind wandered. Tomorrow was her first day at a new school, and her stomach churned with nerves. The next morning, Nina stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her uniform. The navy blue blazer and pleated skirt fit her well, but she couldn't help but feel self-conscious. She had always been bigger than most girls her age, and her weight often made her a target for teasing. "Ready, sweetheart?" her mother called from downstairs. With a deep breath, Nina grabbed her backpack and headed out the door. The drive to school was smooth, the family's electric car gliding silently through Lagos' busy streets. The school, a prestigious institution known for its advanced technology and modern facilities, loomed large and intimidating as they approached. "Don't worry, Nina," her father said, sensing her unease. "You'll make friends in no time." Nina nodded, though her heart raced as they pulled up to the school gates. Students bustled about, chatting and laughing in groups. Some glanced curiously at the new girl stepping out of the sleek car. "Good luck, sweetheart," her mother said, giving her a quick hug. With that, Nina stepped into the schoolyard, clutching her bag tightly. She kept her head down, trying to avoid the stares and whispers. The day began smoothly enough. Nina found her classes easily, thanks to the digital map on her tablet. The teachers seemed kind, and a few classmates offered polite smiles. By lunchtime, she started to feel a tiny bit of hope that things might not be so bad. But then she noticed them. A group of 4 girls, dressed immaculately despite their uniforms, sat at the center of the cafeteria. Their table was surrounded by admirers, and their laughter rang out above the general noise. "That's Grace and her crew," a voice whispered beside Nina. Startled, she turned to see a boy with glasses and a kind smile. "I'm Kola," he said, holding out his hand. "Nina," she replied, shaking it hesitantly. "They're the school's royalty," Kola continued, nodding toward the group. "Lara's the leader. If she likes you, your life here will be easy. If she doesn't," he trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Nina's stomach sank as Lara's gaze swept across the cafeteria and landed on her. A sly smile spread across the girl's face as she whispered something to her friends. They all turned to look at Nina, their eyes gleaming with mischief. "Looks like they've noticed you," Kola muttered, his tone uneasy. Nina swallowed hard, forcing herself to look away. She had hoped to stay under the radar, but it seemed her arrival had already sparked interest in the worst possible way. That evening, Nina sat on her bed, replaying the day's events in her mind. Her room with all its luxury felt suffocating, She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. They don't know who I am, she whispered to herself, her voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of something darker. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to flicker for a moment, her usual shy expression replaced by one of cold determination. Nina had spent years trying to leave her past behind, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let anyone push her around. Tomorrow the game would begin. Nina woke up with a mix of nervousness and resolve. Her reflection in the mirror reminded her of her promise to herself the night before. She would stay calm, keep her abilities hidden, and handle whatever came her way with grace. But deep down she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that trouble was brewing. Her father dropped her off at the school gates, wishing her luck with a warm smile. The morning air was crisp and students milled about, greeting each other and chatting. Nina clutched her backpack, stepping into the throng with her head held high. The first class went smoothly. The teacher, Mrs. Adeola, was warm and engaging, and Nina even managed to answer a question correctly, earning an approving nod. By mid-morning she felt her nerves beginning to ease. But during the break, everything changed. As she walked down the corridor, Nina heard hushed whispers and giggles behind her. Turning slightly, she caught sight of Grace and her group, their eyes locked on her. "Hey, new girl," Grace called, her voice dripping with false friendliness. Nina froze, debating whether to respond. Before she could decide, Grace and her friends surrounded her. "You're Nina, right?" Grace asked, her tone sweet but her eyes sharp. "Yes," Nina replied, her voice steady. "I'm Laura," she said, flipping her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. "And these are my friends, Bella, Laura, and Blessing. He just wanted to say hi. You looked so lonely during lunch yesterday." Nina blinked, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, but I was fine." Lara's smile widened, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That's good. We were worried you might not fit in here." The others giggled and Nina's stomach tightened. She knew this wasn't a friendly chat. It was a test, a subtle way of asserting dominance. "Anyway," Grace continued, leaning in slightly, "we're having a party this weekend. Maybe you should come. It'll be fun." Nina hesitated. "I'll think about it." Grace raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to anyone refusing her. But before she could say anything else, the bell rang, signaling the start of the next class. By lunchtime, Nina realized that Lara's group wasn't done with her. As she carried her tray toward an empty table, a foot shot out in front of her, sending her sprawling. Her tray clattered to the ground, food spilling everywhere. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. "Oh no, are you okay?" Bella asked, her voice full of fake concern. Nina scrambled to her feet, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She clenched her fists, resisting the urge to react. "Careful, new girl," Grace said, smirking. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself." Kola appeared at her side, helping her pick up the scattered food. "Ignore them," he whispered. "They're just trying to get a rise out of you." Nina nodded, though her hands trembled with suppressed anger. She had spent years learning to control herself, to keep her powers hidden. She wouldn't let these girls provoke her. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Nina focused on her classes, determined not to let the bullies ruin her first week. But their taunts continued, subtle and cutting. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted. As she gathered her things, she noticed Grace and her group lingering by the lockers, watching her. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked past, but she refused to look at them. Outside, the school's sleek automated buses hummed as students boarded. Nina opted to walk home, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. But as she turned a corner, she heard footsteps behind her. Glancing back, she saw Grace and her friends following her, their expressions smug. "Hey Nina," Grace called. "Wait up." Nina stopped, her heart pounding. She turned slowly, keeping her face neutral. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice calm. "We just wanted to talk," Grace said, stepping closer. "You're new here and we thought you might need some guidance." Nina's eyes narrowed. "I don't need anything from you." Grace laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Oh, you're feisty. I like that. But listen, new girl, you're in our territory now. If you want to survive, you'd better learn your place." Nina felt a surge of anger but forced herself to stay calm. "I don't want any trouble. Just leave me alone." Lara's smile faded, replaced by a glare. "You don't get to make demands, Nina. You'll do what we say or we'll make your life miserable." The other girls laughed, their voices echoing in the quiet street. Nina's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. She could feel the familiar heat rising within her, the power she had worked so hard to suppress. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Have it your way." She turned and walked away, ignoring their laughter. But as she rounded the corner, her eyes glowed faintly for a brief moment, a warning to herself. She knew this wasn't over. That night, Nina sat in her room, staring at the holographic screen on her wall. Her drone hovered nearby, its soft hum filling the silence. "They don't know who they're dealing with," she murmured. Her mind raced with memories of her past. The training, the rituals, the incidents that had forced her family to move so many times. She had promised her parents she would leave that part of herself behind, but now she wasn't so sure. For the first time since moving to Lagos, Nina felt something other than fear. She felt a spark of defiance, a determination to stand her ground. "Let's see how far they're willing to go," she whispered, her voice steady. She didn't know it yet, but the game had already begun. The next morning, Nina arrived at school with a heavy heart, her mind replaying the previous day's events. She hoped Grace and her crew would lose interest in her, but deep down she knew it was unlikely. She kept her head low, slipping into class quietly. The day started off uneventfully, but it wasn't long before things took a turn. During math class, Nina opened her desk to find a note scrawled in messy handwriting. "Fat girl, go back to where you came from." The words stung, but Nina swallowed her anger. She glanced around the room, noticing Lara's smirk and the stifled giggles from her friends. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. It didn't stop there. In the hallway between classes, her locker had been tampered with. As she opened it, a cascade of paper scraps fell out, each one scribbled with cruel messages. "Loser, ugly, you don't belong here." Nina bent down to pick up the mess, her hands shaking. Kola appeared by her side again, his expression filled with sympathy. "They're relentless," he muttered. Nina nodded, biting her lip to keep her emotions in check. "I'll be fine," she said, though her voice wavered. But deep inside something was starting to shift. Later that day, Nina sat alone in the library, hoping to escape the chaos. She ran her fingers over a book's worn spine, trying to focus on the pages in front of her. "Enjoying your quiet time?" Lara's voice broke the silence. Nina looked up to see the group standing by her table. "Shouldn't you be studying?" Nina replied, her voice calm but firm. Grace laughed, a sharp mocking sound. "Oh, we're just here to make sure you don't get too comfortable. Keep you on your toes." Before Nina could respond, Bella snatched the book from her hands and flipped through it carelessly. "What's this? Trying to be the nerdy type now?" "Give it back," Nina said, her voice low. Lara smirked. "Or what?" Nina's hands tightened into fists under the table. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the promise she had made to her parents. No powers, no incidents. Grace leaned closer. "Look, Nina. We're just having a little fun. You don't want to make this harder on yourself, do you?" Nina stared at her, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Grace tossed the book onto the table with a smirk. "We'll see you around, new girl." As they walked away, Nina exhaled slowly, her mind swirling with frustration. She had spent years learning to control her emotions, but these girls were testing her limits. By the end of the week, the pranks had escalated. During gym class, Nina returned to find her uniform smeared with something sticky and foul-smelling. The other girls in the locker room laughed, covering their noses dramatically. "That's disgusting," one of them said, giggling. Nina clenched her jaw, holding back tears as she cleaned up the mess. She could hear Grace and her friends whispering nearby, their laughter echoing in her ears. Later, during lunch, someone tripped her as she carried her tray to a table. She landed hard on the floor, the food splattering across her uniform. The cafeteria erupted in laughter, and Lara's voice rang out above the noise. "Oops. Watch your step, Nina." This time, Kola wasn't there to help her up. She sat on the floor for a moment, her hands trembling as she picked up the pieces. That evening, Nina sat in her room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her normally shy and reserved demeanor was replaced by something darker. "They want to fight," she whispered to herself. "Fine. Let's give them one." She reached for the small, carved amulet hidden at the back of her drawer. It was a relic from her past, a symbol of the mystical powers she had trained to control. Her parents had forbidden her from using it, but Nina knew she couldn't stay silent anymore. As she held the amulet, memories of her training flooded back. The rituals, the meditations, the intense lessons that had shaped her into someone stronger than she appeared. She had buried that part of herself for so long, but now it stirred within her, ready to rise. "They think they can break me," she murmured, her eyes glinting with determination. "But they have no idea who they're dealing with." The next day would be different. The following morning, Nina walked into school with her head held high. Her usual nervous energy was replaced by a quiet confidence, though she kept her expression neutral. Grace and her crew were waiting by the lockers, their eyes lighting up as they spotted her. "Hey Nina," Grace called. "Ready for another fun day?" Nina didn't respond. She walked past them without a glance, her steps measured and deliberate. The group exchanged surprised looks. "What's with her?" Laura muttered. "Don't worry," Grace said with a smirk. "We'll knock her down a peg." What they didn't know was that Nina was no longer afraid. The days of staying quiet were over. That afternoon, Nina found herself in the library again, flipping through a book on physics. She wasn't reading, though. Her mind was focused on the amulet tucked safely in her pocket. When Grace and her friends walked in, Nina didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her book slowly and stood up. "Hi, Laura," she said, her voice steady. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Oh, look." The new girl finally found her voice. Nina stepped closer, her eyes locking onto Lara's. For a moment, the air seemed to grow heavier, the room quieter. "You've had your fun," Nina said, her tone calm but firm. "But it ends now." The girls exchanged uneasy glances, the usual smirk slipping from Lara's face. "Or what?" Grace challenged, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Nina didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away, leaving the group standing in stunned silence. The game had changed, and Nina was about to show them exactly what she was capable of. The school day had almost ended, but the tension lingered like a storm waiting to break. Nina could feel the bullies' eyes on her as she walked through the halls. Their taunts had grown quieter, their laughter less certain, but Nina knew this was the calm before the storm. She kept her steps steady and her expression neutral. The amulet in her pocket felt warm against her fingers, a subtle reminder of the power she had long suppressed. It happened after the last bell rang. The school grounds were nearly empty as students hurried to catch their buses or head home. Nina had stayed behind to finish an assignment in the library, unaware that Grace and her crew were waiting for her. As she left the building, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, she heard the sound of muffled giggles. She froze, her senses on high alert. "Leaving so soon, Nina?" Lara's voice called out, sharp and mocking. Nina turned to see the four girls standing behind her, blocking the exit. Their expressions were cold, their usual smirks replaced with something more dangerous. "What do you want?" Nina asked, her voice steady. Grace stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. "We warned you, didn't we? You don't get to ignore us and walk away like you're better than us." "I'm not trying to be better than anyone," Nina replied calmly. "I just want to be left alone." "Too bad," Laura sneered. "We're not done with you yet." Before Nina could respond, they grabbed her backpack and shoved her against the wall. Her breath caught, but she refused to show fear. "We're going to teach you a lesson," Bella said, her voice low. Nina's patience snapped. She could feel the energy building within her, the same power she had spent years trying to control. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath. "Let me go," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Or what?" Grace taunted, leaning closer. When Nina opened her eyes, they glowed faintly, a subtle, unnatural light that sent a chill down Lara's spine. Without warning, the room seemed to darken, the air growing heavy and oppressive. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The girls exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado faltering. "What's going on?" Blessing whispered, her voice trembling. Nina stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop, and a low hum filled the air. "I warned you," Nina said, her voice carrying an edge of power. "You should have left me alone." Grace tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "You're just trying to scare us. You think some parlor trick is going to—" Before she could finish, the amulet in Nina's pocket glowed, and an invisible force swept through the hallway. The girls stumbled back, their eyes wide with fear. "What is this?" Bella cried, clutching Lara's arm. Nina didn't answer. She raised her hand slightly, and the lockers along the walls rattled violently, their doors slamming open and shut. Papers and books flew into the air as if caught in a whirlwind. "Stop it," Grace screamed, her voice breaking. "You wanted to see what I'm capable of," Nina said, her tone icy. "Well, here it is." She took another step forward and the hum grew louder. The girls cowered, their once confident expressions replaced by sheer terror. Blessing dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, we're sorry. We didn't mean it." Nina's gaze softened for a moment, but she didn't lower her hand. "Sorry isn't enough. You wanted to make my life miserable. How does it feel now that the tables have turned?" Grace tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She stared at Nina, her mind racing with disbelief. The girl they had mocked and bullied was something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Nina took a step back, letting the energy dissipate. The hallway returned to normal, the oppressive air lifting. The girls remained frozen, too afraid to move. "Stay away from me," Nina said, her voice firm but quiet. "If you don't, next time I won't hold back." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the bullies trembling in her wake. By the time Nina reached home, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving her drained. She sat on her bed, the amulet still warm in her hand. Her parents had always warned her about using her powers, reminding her of the risks. But tonight she felt no regret. For the first time in years she had stood up for herself. As she stared out the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Nina felt a strange sense of calm. She knew the rumors would spread like wildfire through the school, but she didn't care. "They'll think twice before messing with me again," she murmured to herself, a faint smile on her lips. What she didn't realize was that her actions had set something greater into motion. Something that would change everything. The next morning, the air in the school buzzed with tension. Nina could feel it the moment she stepped onto the campus. Whispers followed her through the corridors, students darting glances her way before quickly looking away. "She's the one," someone muttered. "I heard she's a witch," another voice added. Nina kept her head high, pretending not to notice. She wasn't surprised. Word had spread faster than she'd anticipated. Her display of power the previous evening had left an indelible mark, and now the entire school was caught in the ripple effect. But Nina didn't regret what she had done. Not yet. By lunchtime the cafeteria felt like a powder keg. Nina carried her tray to an empty table, acutely aware of the hushed conversations around her. She could see the bullies sitting in a corner, their faces pale and drawn. Grace avoided meeting her eyes, her usual confidence completely shattered. Kola approached her table, his expression cautious. "Nina," he said softly, sliding into the seat across from her. "What happened yesterday?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her fork. "Nothing you need to worry about." Kola frowned. "People are saying things, crazy things, about you." Nina met his gaze, her voice steady. "Let them say whatever they want." For a moment, Kola looked as if he wanted to press further, but something in Nina's expression stopped him. He nodded slowly, choosing to drop the subject. The tension escalated when a teacher approached Nina during her last class of the day. "Nina, the principal wants to see you," he said, his voice clipped. She stood without a word, the weight of the stares from her classmates heavy on her back. The walk to the principal's office felt endless, each step echoing ominously in the empty hallway. Inside, Principal Alyamide sat behind his sleek, modern desk, his expression grave. "Nina," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "We need to talk." She took a seat, her hands resting in her lap. "I've been hearing troubling reports," he said, leaning forward. "Several students have come to me claiming you did something unusual yesterday." Nina's heart raced, but she kept her face calm. "What kind of reports?" Principal Alyamide hesitated, his gaze sharp. "They're saying you scared some students using unnatural means. Do you know what they're talking about?" She held his gaze, her voice steady. "No, sir. I think people are exaggerating." He studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I don't know what happened, but let me be clear. This school has a zero-tolerance policy for bullying or any form of intimidation. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir," Nina replied, her expression unreadable. "Good," he said, leaning back. "You may go." As she left the office, Nina's mind raced. She had narrowly avoided suspicion, but she knew the situation was far from over. The bullies, meanwhile, were unraveling. Grace sat in her room that night, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her once pristine confidence was gone, replaced by fear. She replayed the events in the hallway over and over, her mind unable to make sense of what she had seen. "She's dangerous," Blessing whispered during their group call later that evening. "We shouldn't mess with her anymore." Grace clenched her fists. "She humiliated us. We can't just let her get away with it." "What can we do?" Bella shot back. "Did you see what she did? She's not normal." Laura nodded, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go near her again." Grace scowled, but deep down she felt the same fear. Nina wasn't just another target. They had underestimated her and now they were paying the price. The next day Nina found a note in her locker. It wasn't like the cruel messages she'd received before. This one was scrawled hastily, the handwriting shaky. "Meet us in the abandoned science lab after school. We need to talk." Nina stared at the note, her mind racing. She knew it was a trap, but she also knew she couldn't ignore it. After school she made her way to the old science lab, the halls eerily quiet. The room was dimly lit, the shadows stretching long across the cracked tiles. Grace and her friends were waiting for her, their faces pale but determined. "You wanted to talk?" Nina said, her voice calm. Grace stepped forward, her hands trembling. We're sorry, Nina. For everything." Nina raised an eyebrow, surprised by the admission. "Why the change of heart?" Blessing spoke up, her voice shaking. "We didn't know who you really were. We thought you were just another girl we could push around." "And now?" Nina asked, her tone sharp. "Now we know better," Laura whispered. For a long moment Nina said nothing. She could see the fear in their eyes, the realization of how deeply they had underestimated her. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "But let this be a lesson. You can't go around hurting people without consequences." Grace nodded, her face a mixture of relief and shame. "We won't bother you again. We promise." As Nina left the lab she felt a strange mix of emotions. She had won, but the victory felt hollow. The fear she had seen in their eyes was the same fear she had once seen in others. The fear that had followed her family from city to city, forcing them to start over time and again. She had protected herself, but at what cost? That night as she stared out at the city lights, Nina made a silent vow. She would never let anyone hurt her again, but she would also never let her power define her. She would be more than the girl with the glowing eyes and the mysterious abilities. She would be Nina. A survivor, a fighter, and someone who refused to be broken.